Good afternoon. I'm Campbell McCrary from Amvest Capital, Vice President of Capital Markets here in New York. Welcome to the Amvest Capital Inc. live webinar with Viper Minerals Corp. Viper trades on the TSX Venture as Viper, VIPR, and on the OTCQB as VIPRF. Do hope you'll enjoy today's program. It'll also be available in replay mode. Do chat in your questions in the question pane of GoToWebinar, or you can email them in, or you can chat them in, but we love live, off-the-cuff, thoughtful questions, either macro or technical and everything in the middle. So we'll try and ask questions in real time. A little bit about us. Amvest, New York-based specialist investment management, corporate finance firm focused solely on the natural resource sector. The all-important disclaimer, this call is for informational purposes only. Have with us today Steve Cope, who's the CEO and director of Silver Viper, over 12 years of experience in the mining sector and has worked in corporate development for Orco Silver, Barsley Minerals, Aurex Minerals, and Timmins Gold Corp. His responsibilities with these companies have covered a wide range of areas, including financing companies, project evaluation, IR, and M&A. Again, following the formal presentation, members of Amvest Capital will come on and ask questions of management, and we really look forward to any questions that were to be sent in. And then we'd love it if after the end of the session, when you get a queue and you log off, you could provide some feedback. It'll get straight to Steve and his group over almost instantaneously. So with that, welcome to the show, Steve. How are you? How are things at Silver Viper?
Things are good, and I'm doing well. We're surviving COVID and working from home still.
Yeah.
Certainly want to thank Campbell and the rest of the Amvest team for bringing us these webinars monthly. I think it's been great at getting our information out to shareholders, and I see on the list we certainly have a number of the existing shareholders and a lot of new names as well attending today's talk. So I guess we'll go through the deck and introduce the company, and then provide updates of kind of what's changed here in the last month since the last webinar. So like I said, Silver Viper Minerals. I will be making some forward-looking statements today, so draw your attention to the following slide. When you're looking at a junior precious metals explorer, there are three things that I think you should really be focused on when you're investing in them. One is that it has a high quality asset, two, that asset still has lots of potential, and three, that it has a strong management and shareholder group behind it. We certainly have all three of those. The high quality asset is the La Virginia project. It's located in eastern Sonora, 220 kilometers along a paved highway in the Sierra Madres. As far as the asset's concerned, the big thing that got us excited here was our El Rubi discovery and subsequent discovery that we made in hole 245. We also have a historic area that mine finders and La Virginia were focused on during their time exploring it. This was mine finders' #1 exploration asset when they were bought by Pan American Silver. It was originally found to be a lookalike to the Dolores mine, which was obviously mine finders' big producing asset that Pan American bought them for $1.5 billion. They wanted to find another one, so they flew this whole mountain range looking for another Dolores. There was 200 kilometers of a gap to the north of Dolores where there was no modern large-scale mines, which is very strange for Mexico. At Dolores, 100K to the south of La Virginia, and 100K to the north, you had the El Tigre mine, which is now owned by, it's no longer in production, and there's a junior silver tiger that's been exploring on it, but it still has a healthy resource. We made our discovery at El Rubi in our first phase of drilling. That discovery hole was 13 meters of over 3 grams gold and over 200 silver. That main structure is, since then and in phase 2 has produced, the narrow high grade portion of that has been producing kilogram plus silver numbers associated with high gold. You can see one there on this slide, 3 meters of over 22 grams gold and over 1,400 grams silver. There's also a large low grade component, tends to be a halo around our high grade structures. And we just intercepted, we mentioned it, the discovery at hole 245, which is 100 meters west of that main zone, but that was our longest intercept to date. Overall low grade, but certainly above the average grade of the open pit heap leach mines in the state, and we'll dive into further on why that's important. but that intercept was 110 meters of 0.75 gold and 38 grams silver. So not the screaming grade that you're typically, compared to the main zone, but at those widths and what the average mine in this area operates at a 0.5 gram gold average grade in these open pit heap leach mines. So Ruby's really starting to show the potential to start off as an open pit and then go underground in those high grade structures afterwards. Some of that is the potential we're talking about. We're working towards defining a maiden resource on the project. This will finally give us a number for that area of the project that was historically worked by mine finders, and also incorporate a starting number at the El Ruby area of the project. We're continuing to drill on a number of the anomalies, so there's always new discovery potential, which would be another major catalyst, and we'll talk about one later that it's not in the presentation, but I know from Dale being on site right now, our VP of Exploration, that they're really, really high on a new target that's produced with the XRF gun, the highest sampling at surface that we've seen on any of these targets, including El Ruby. So we're really excited about a new zone of potential, and we'll talk about that when we get later into the presentation. Strong management and shareholder group. We have a technical team combined with over 150 years experience in the field. Dale takes the lead on this project, but this is part of the Belcara management group, so that affords us the ability to have 3 senior geologists on staff currently. They've worked all over the world. They've worked for the majors. They've worked for juniors. I would put our team of geologists up against any other team in the industry, and it's invaluable having those guys be able to compare notes from somewhere else they've worked in the world to figuring out the intricacies of a project and different things to look for and target. And that's one of the reasons why our team gets the respect from the majors, and the majors tend to get involved with us at a much earlier stage than other companies in our group or in our industry. Management owns 23%, always very important when you're looking at a company. The management has skin in the game. You can see that we're active in the market supporting the stock. We're believers and want our interests aligned with our shareholders. We're very strong on the institutional side. I believe we have somewhere around 20 funds that own the stock right now. We've certainly had a few that have been very long and supportive, and I see a couple of them are on this call today. Again, those guys, a lot of them are involved with us across all of our deals. They've seen the level of work that our group does. They've seen us deliver shareholder value back, and so they put their faith in us. And in this case, 2 of our major funds got involved while this company was still private, and have continued to support on the subsequent financings. Low share count, 81 million shares outstanding. We've only done 2 financings since the company did its initial IPO in 2017. Both of them were oversubscribed. The last one closed at the beginning of June this year. I already mentioned, you can see where it is from Hermosillo, which has a major international airport. You take the paved highway to a town that's close to the project called Corrichico, and from there it's about 30 to 40 minutes in on a gravel and dirt road. You can see the image up here. Our camp is actually built right on this hill in this area. As far as infrastructure, we are in a more remote part of the state, being up in the mountains, but we do have a power line corridor that's just been put in that connects that town in Corrichico to the next town down the road of Mesa Tres Rios. We've had water year round, and we have roads into camp. We do have to hike into that El Ruby target for drilling, but it's a fairly simple hike, and the drillers would do that every shift. We would drill 24 hours a day. It's actually a pretty good setup, and really being that close to a paved highway in a town, when a mining company does get involved and ultimately put this thing into production, there would be some additional cost for roads, but there's nothing major on a capex front here to get involved and to get mining, other than building the mill and the usual costs that are associated with the mine. We have the right to go to 100% on the project. This image on the top left here probably does the best job explaining this. We own everything in red 100%. We acquired that from Pan American for a 2% NSR. That gave us ownership of all the historic core, all of the database, and all of those claims. The blue area was where all that historic work was done by mine finders and Pan American, and also where our discovery at El Ruby was right at the top of that. On that, we have the right to go to 100% on a back-end loaded option agreement. You can see it down here. We've made our first 2 payments. The anniversary of it is every June. Of note, that final payment, half of that can be made in shares at our discretion. This image is these 2 images kind of show potential of the area and where the drilling has been focused. This image here is zoomed in on those internal claims. You can see just the start of El Ruby here. And all these black dots are the historic pads from mine finders. The furthest they drilled was a few holes up in this Campo Santo area, but they never made it. They didn't even sample El Rubi in the past. Most of their work and where the bulk of that historic resource will come from will be in this Las Huatas area and in this Virginia area, with a few ounces in some of these other areas. The area I referenced that our geologist has just gone on and did, the additional reconnaissance work is up in this area here. And again, mine finders and Pan American sampled all the way to almost close to it, up to a dike that sits up in here, but didn't go past the dike. And what happened, I guess the dike sat on a ridge. Our geologists just were up there, and Dale was back on site for the first time since COVID happened, and they happened to look out and he noticed something that caught his eye. And so they hiked down to it and started sampling an area, and it looks a lot like this main Las Huatas trend, which may, instead of coming off to this direction like mine finders Pan American may have thought, it looks to us like it's running up through here. So that's a target that's going to be, we're going to get drill ready and we'll be starting on in the new year. First thing with one of the rigs, we'll be testing this new zone up in this area. But I would say it's the most excited I've seen Dale about any of our anomalies to date. They're, seeing that kind of the grades they were seeing in the XRF gun at surface. We've sent a number of those samples off to labs and we'll see what the assays come back with. But just on the XRF gun, they're really excited about that area and think it's another one of these flexure blowouts along this very major trend that runs for tens of kilometers. You see, these silicified dikes and that outcropping on surface, but they all tend to be controlled by this major fault that comes ripping right through here that you can see on this left image. We see our silicified dikes running parallel to that. And again, this where we tend to get the best grades along this very large trend is when you get a change of direction in the main structure. You can see it here in Virginia, Las Huatas. It kind of flexes and changes direction there. At El Rubi, we have a little flexure and change of direction, and that's where you start to see the better grades there. It looks like there may be another flexure up in this area, and so again, Dale and them are very excited about that target. So stay tuned on that moving forward into phase 3 at the start of the new year. There are some old workings in that historic area of Virginia and Las Huatas. Just gives you an idea of the stockwork veining you see here. As we get up to El Rubi, you still get a lot of stockwork veining, but you also get an increase in the breccias, and as we move north on the project, we seem to be entering a higher heat environment, which our Dale and geologists tend to like as well. This image, this is from Virginia. This vein in this area tends to be about 20 meters wide. Here at Virginia, it's a narrower target in this adit. It's a meter to 2 meters wide in that area. And then you have Las Huatas just south of that, which is where the bulk of those historic ounces. But that's area had easier access, so you do have some old underground workings, but they're not too extensive, and there's still a lot left in that historic area as well. We have, again, you can see this is in Hermosillo in a warehouse, all the historic core. So if we need, our independent was just on site and he was very happy with the QA/QC. He's got a couple of check samples that he'd like us to send off, but very minimal. But we do have access for all of that. It's great for site visits. We can take people to this warehouse after they arrive in Hermosillo and do all of the historic core looking. We've now leased the warehouse next to that that's storing our core. So it's a good staging point to look at coring an idea before we go out to site when we're doing our site visits. El Rubi has certainly been our main event, what we've been focused on. That discovery, was fantastic. The follow-up discovery, so far we've taken El Rubi with assays to 500 meters of strike length, down as deep as 350 meters. We're still open along strike and at depth. And then with the discovery of hole 245, we're starting to add to the width component as well. One important image here, man-portable drill rigs. This is what's allowed us, I believe, to get up to El Rubi where Pan American mine finders couldn't be bothered to. They were using large track-mounted rigs, bulldozing in roads. So it would have been fairly expensive for them to get up to that El Rubi area. With the man-portable rigs, we reuse all of our lumber for pads once we're done on one spot. We put down grass seed, and other than the drill collar, you can barely tell that we were ever there drilling. We're environmentally permitted to work all over the project. We have, permitted for different drill pads and collars everywhere. So that equipment and that technology has been a bit of a game changer in industry over the last few years as these rigs have become more and more powerful. Globe Explorer is the drilling company that we're using, and they've told us that this rig can go as deep as 1,000 meters if we wanted to push it. So far, I think our deepest hole is around 500 meters, and we don't really want to push it too much further than that. But at 500, they've been very accurate, and they're very quick and aggressive. I think our guys are averaging around 75 to 100 meters a shift. We run 2 12-hour shifts, so it's very productive. The geologists with the 2 rigs on site have, they've really had to keep up with the logging and coring and make sure there's no backlogs. We had to buy a 3rd drill saw to make sure that there was no backlog happening because the core was coming in so fast. Image down here is interesting. One of the things that's kind of unique for us at El Rubi versus the other projects that we've worked over, the past couple decades in Mexico, is that at El Rubi we see more and more visible gold. It's always nice, and it's nice to see that before you send stuff off to assays, but that's not that typical in Mexico. You'll see the silver mineralization, the darker stuff, you see that quite frequently, but seeing visible gold is, it's fantastic. And this was taken through a microscope to kind of see how it, how it was represented here, but always something that, when you see visible gold, you can expect that you're going to have some higher grades in those samples. Won't spend too much time on this slide. This highlights a lot of our narrower high grade material, but again, I really want to speak to the fact that there's also a very large low grade component to this that's economic low grade, that both in the main El Rubi structure and some of the stringers off of it, and then this new discovery zone of hole 245. But these in themselves as high grade structures are very, very attractive, obviously, and our high grade structure averages anywhere from 1/2 meter up to 8 meters wide. Talked about 245 a couple times here. You can see on this image, how it's represented. Our main structure here at El Rubi is vertical, and some of these are a little oblique to the stem, but it does line up very well. You can see it lining up through here, running northeast, southwest, or southeast to northwest. And again, here's hole 245 is a 100-meter step out to the west. It still had some high grade components to it, but it was a very continuous, very well kept together and up fairly shallow in the hole. We see it up on surface. It does outcrop up here as well. So again, we think this main structure is probably vertical. One of the things in the last month that has changed that we started doing some oriented core. And what we're seeing is that oriented core is confirming that our main structure is vertical, but we are going to have to go back and start reinterpreting some of the stringers and some offshoots. And there does seem to be also a horizontal component to some of these high grade stringers. So that's something that's been a bit of a game changer in how we're going to look at things moving forward, and possibly changing the orientation of some of our drill holes. But again, Dale has said he's done oriented core on a lot of different projects, and this is the best he's ever seen oriented core work on a project. So that's exciting and moving forward, and hopefully it'll get us vector in on some additional high grade structures and how they sit, and will help add ounces in a resource as well. But yeah, you can see they just hold 245 in the offshoot 100 meters to the west. We don't have any additional assays yet. We are following up on this area of the project again as we speak. I know from Dale yesterday there was a 50-meter step out to the south that they were pretty excited about. And again, we have no assays, but this area was certainly a game changer, and you can really start to envision, especially on this section, how an open pit would start to form on that El Rubi area, and then go underground on these really high grade structures afterwards. El Rubi, unlike some of those other pictures you saw, is much more favorable for open pit mining. El Rubi is a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer flat plateau. So versus kind of the steeper hilly sections that you see in Com Virginia, Las Guatas, La Virginia area of the project where the camp is here, much more favorable for open pit mining, with much less strip in that. So we've had a couple majors on site, and again, the results of hole 245 really grabbed the attention of a lot of majors. We had a number go under CA on the back end of that release. It's been the next step to that would be a number of them wanting to come out for site visits. We had a few before coronavirus on site. There are a number that would like to get out there and take a look at this as well. But it definitely was an eye-opening hole on top of our main El Rubi hits that we've already had. This is core from that hole 245. Looks like El Rubi core. Again, you can see the breccias, you can see some of the stockwork veining. Our initial concern when we saw such a broad interval was that we somehow drilled down something, but again, you can see in the core here that that's certainly not the case. I know the team is updating this image now. This kind of giving you our idea of the main El Rubi structure and the high grade stringers and how they might come in. I know based on that oriented core, a number of these orientations are going to change and become more horizontal in nature, and also with that hole 245, you'll see a much broader step out here. The 245 wasn't on this section, but with Dale being on site and the team there, the last month we haven't had too much in the way of updating images. Dale will be finishing up at site and coming home in about a week's time. So then we'll have some updates in this as far as our interpretations of what these zones look like. So still very interesting, and some of the sections may be this way, but there is definitely a horizontal component and also our whole 245 step out to the west. This is the anomalies that we identified after phase one. We did a lot of this work in 2019. Dale and the team actually are up, or they just finished up here. They spent a few nights up in this area trying to tighten up this spacing. So we'll wait some of the results back from samples, but this is another potential target that we're trying to get drill ready for next year and up in this area. But they're very excited about this. They can see the silicified dikes from kilometers away that were up in the hills in this area. So again, another possible future discovery if we decide to drill this area. That new area that I referenced would be off of this image and kind of up, down here back towards that main area. El Rubi sits about 5 kilometers north of the heart of that Converginia and Las Huatas area where all that historic work was done. We are awaiting assays from this eastern anomaly and the northern anomaly, which were 2 of our anomalies that we tested. We've put out most of our results from Macho that hit the zone. It looked like we hit the zone at a much higher level there than where we are at El Rubi. So Macho is, again, 2 kilometers of potential strike length. And while we saw some low grade, 1-2 gram stuff in Macho, I think we have to steepen up and go deeper, but it's, we'll see. We'll probably go back to it again at some point in Q3. But right now we're really focused on this western zone and getting, some additional new anomalies to do some reconnaissance testing on. Geophysics that we did this year, interesting that this large arrowhead shape seems to line up exactly with those geochem anomalies. This is a buried intrusion in the area. All of this area is highly prolific for mineralization. I didn't mention it, but when we get involved with a project, we're only looking for something that the major miners are interested in. And for us, that's a 1 million ounce gold equivalent or 100 million ounce silver equivalent. We certainly see that just in this El Rubi area and surrounding anomalies alone, never mind the historic and everything else that we have on the project. Kind of talked about all our plans. We've had 2 rigs turning on the project. We'll continue drilling until probably second week of December. We'll take about a 3 or 4 week break for Christmas and then go back middle January to resume and start a phase 3 program. We've completed over 15,000 meters this year. By the end of the year, we'll probably be close to 20,000 meters in phase 2. Originally, it was a 5,000 meter program to start with, but we just kept it going as we've had success. We are funded to do all that work through the end of this year and start off of the Q3 or the phase 3 program. But we would probably look at some point after the resource going back to the market potentially and raising some more money. This was done after phase 1. It gives you an idea of what the wireframes look like in the historic area. This area up at El Rubi, this was only after 5 holes that were done in phase 1. This will be dramatically different. We only have LiDAR survey up to that point. So that's one of the things we're waiting on right now for the resources to get a LiDAR survey done, and we're expecting that to happen anytime now. Dale's been in contact with the company. They've had some problem getting their equipment into Mexico and to get ready on that, but it should be coming anytime now. The fact that it hasn't happened yet may push the resource potentially into January, but we'll still wait and see on that. Our independent was on site. He's back home now writing, starting to write that 43-101 report, but we do need that advanced topographic data that comes to the LiDAR for that resource as well. We have done some preliminary metallurgical work. We haven't news released it yet. This work was just samples that were sent off to the university in Sonora showing us that the silver and gold is hosted in acanthite and that gold and silver's alloyed is electrum. Our project tends to be about this percentage, about 55 gold, 45% silver. Some areas you get the silver spikes or other areas where gold spikes, but on average, that's about what our breakdown is. We did send some samples off to the lab for a basic bottle roll test, and what we can say is this rock does leach very well. We're seeing 90 to 95% recoveries on the gold just on the simple bottle roll test, and then silver leaching at 60 to 70%, which is, across the different grade ranges, which is great. We are going to do some additional metallurgical work to show that high grade silver can be recovered at a much higher percentage and a bit of a different method. We talked about the Belcarra Group. There are 3 public companies under the Belcarra Group management. Again, the advantages of having those geologists on staff. Our model, like I said, is to get involved during anywhere somewhere along the exploration phase, take it as far as a feasibility study and vend it off to one of the mining companies. That's where our expertise and where we know is we're very good at exploring. We've made lots of discoveries in the past. Orco Silver and the La Preciosa deposit was probably the best example of that. We put the very first drill hole into that project, grew it to over 270 million ounces and sold it in a bidding war between Core and First Majestic for over 350 million US. Some of the key team here, again, very recognizable names in our industry, and again, been involved all the way back. Most of this team is still the intact team from the Orco Silver days. Low share count. We're about 3.5 million in cash right now. Share price is a bit higher than that. We're around 44.5. We were up at a high a few months ago of 85 cents. We've pulled off like our peers. We also created a bit of liquidity indirectly. We triggered an acceleration clause on the warrants from a financing that was done just over a year ago. And that was based on the stock trading at a volume weighted average of 70 cents Canadian for 10 straight trading days. We hit a high of 85 cents in that time frame. Then metals prices did their consolidation about 3 days after we triggered that. We also had the shares come free trading from our June financing. So it certainly created an opportunity for people to build a bit of a position. It seems to have, it got down into the 30s. It's starting to work its way back up now. So I would expect to start moving back towards those highs as we move forward, and the chaos from this US election and coronavirus start to ease off, and money that's sitting on the sidelines in our industry right now starts to come back in. There's not a lot of quality silver names out there. We've heard that time and time again, and we're on a very short list of companies that have very good exposure to silver. And so this is a company that will be one of the few that people really start to pour money back into as they take money off the sideline and get more confident in what's happening in the world. Similar to what we saw on the back end of that first lockdown in March, we saw a lot of money come back in, stocks fell off, but then they really started to scream back up. And I think you'll see that hopefully coming here quickly as, again, those events start to ease off and the fears of lockdowns and chaos around the US election ease. We do have one analyst with official coverage right now. I'm expecting a few more to pick up coverage soon. Derek just upped his target to $1 on the company recently. Again, you can see some of the key funds that have owned us for a very long time. Both US Global and Ingalls, got involved with us early, and they've been involved in all of our deals, and are very close shareholder group with our group. Maria at Sprott has it in the silver fund and owns 9.9%. Donald Smith's been a long supportive shareholder of ours. The contrarian group is Peter Ubroth out of the US, who lives in Newport Beach, and again, I think he's become a family friend and been a great shareholder for us in our group. And then Commodity Capital has also been very supportive on the last 2 financings. There are, just isn't enough room to name everyone, all the funds, but we've had funds. We've seen a lot of investment from Australian funds recently on the last couple financings, and also from Europe, US, Canada. There's been a lot of generalist funds start to put money back in our space, and a number of them have invested in Silver Viper. C management, we already talked about, 23%, and retail 17%. In summary, high quality asset, new discovery, very mining friendly jurisdiction. Sonora is the #1 gold producing state in Mexico and #2 or #3 in silver, depending on the year. Most of the major mining companies that operate in Mexico have a mine in that Sonora area. There's been a lot of exploration success recently in Sonora. Mining is the #1 industry in that state. There's no additional royalties. It's a fantastic place to work. Good management team, lots of potential, strong shareholder support, and a healthy treasury. With that, let's open it up for questions, and thank you for your time, and thank you to Amvest for hosting another webinar.
Thanks, Steve. I'd love to learn a little bit more about the Belcarra Group and your success with Orca Silver. What are the similarities and differences? So many investors, all investors, I would think, you back the jockey more than the horse, or in this case, we're excited on both. But what tees you up for even greater success from your previous success, and what is that previous success, and can you be concrete about shareholder value that your group's created?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, Orco was the best example, most recently, and again, that was a company that started under $1 million market cap. And again, we ended up selling it for $350 75 million plus. And that was, that's the model, and that's the kind of return that we're looking for and trying to produce. And that's what general investors should be looking for when they're investing in these exploration stage companies. You want to start seeing returns like that. I mean, that's an extreme case. That's a pretty big return if you're involved when it was under $1 million market cap. But the other companies in our group are Orex Minerals and Barceli Minerals. Barceli was spun out of Orex, another great example of our group providing value. Investors in Orex at the time when we did the spin out, I think Orex was trading around 25 cents. We spun the Barceli out at a 1-for-1 basis, so a free dividend of a share to investors. And I think in that first month, both companies were trading at 25 cents right after that. Since then, Barceli, it's an active joint venture with Agnico Eagle operating in Sweden. Again, adding value where we haven't had to spend a share. We've never done a financing in Barceli Minerals since it was spun out in 2015. They've done over 150,000 meters of drilling on that project in a joint venture, and we've been free carried the whole way and are free carried all the way to the delivery of a pre-feasibility study on that company. So it's again and it's got over 2.5 million ounces of gold on the project now in a very strict resource. Again, that's a great example of a different way to add value and not have to dilute shareholders. The guys who have been shareholders of that company have been there for a long time and are very supportive. And ultimately, that's going to be another one that'll be taken over most likely by Agnico Eagle. But there's also been, royalty companies and some other people looking at what will ultimately be a 30% interest for us and kind of becoming a super royalty potential for them. Art Freeze, in our group leads that one from a geology side, and we referenced our group and having those, various geologists. And the reason we're able to afford to have those, all those different, geologists with a lot of experience is because we have these multiple companies and are able to share our G&A costs. Our salaries are split through all three companies. We split our office rent, we split, everything that we can. And then because of it, our burn rates tend to be a lot lower on the G&A side per company versus a lot of the single company groups that we have in our industry.
Great, thank you. Just kind of jumping around. What about share liquidity? Should we look at the 17% retail shareholding as the only tradable shares?
I think we've seen over the last couple months that some of those shares that were bought by some of the new institutions definitely hit the market. Maybe as it was pulling back, some of those generalist funds were a little scared that have dipped their toes in our space. And we've seen that our liquidity has certainly been up over the last 2 months, around those events that we talked about. But, for the most part, with our key funds that own our stock, certainly the ones that were listed there in the presentation, those are all shareholders that don't trade the stock out in the open market. Those are people that are very supportive and are very long hold investors. So there may be some generalist funds that move in and out a bit out of positions in the space and some of the retail. But again, I would expect that liquidity starts to tighten up if we stay down at these prices until we move back to those highs and keep the liquidity going up there. But it's certainly been an increase in liquidity with those funds, with some of those shares definitely coming free trading from the funds on that last financing.
All right, thank you. Gabe?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. You mentioned earlier in the presentation around the sort of new zone of silicified dikes that Dale recently discovered and that you'll be drilling in the first quarter next year. Do you have those claims already? I don't know, in the presentation it looked like maybe there was an area where you don't have claims, but where that zone is.
That zone is in the heart of those internal claims. It's right in the heart. We have everything that we've talked about. We have a very encompassing claim package that there's nothing that's off of our claims. We, early on with the project, filed a reduction on some of that Pan American ground. We've been paying taxes based on a reduction, but we were adamant to get all of our sampling done and make sure that we have all the key ground. We dropped basically some moose pasture that we didn't see as being interesting, but no, we have everything, and with a pretty healthy buffer around everything that's interesting to us.
Okay, and then will you be testing the site with drilling next year, and sort of what's the main purpose of that program, or have you even built it yet?
We haven't built our program for next year. I would expect to start with 2 rigs, kind of where we're at now, with the potential to add additional based on discoveries. We're still waiting assays from some of those other areas that could be discoveries in themselves too, which in themselves we would want to start delineating those the same way we've been systematically delineating at El Rubi. But that area, again, we would probably start with a reconnaissance program, drill 5 to 10 holes in that target, give it a healthy test, wait for those assays, and then if they come back as a bona fide new discovery, then we would certainly put at least 1 rig there to start growing and expanding on that zone to get ready for a future resource.
Okay, great. Around the met work, you mentioned that you're going to do some sort of optimization work to the existing bottle roll testing. What sort of work is that?
Dale's
and when will it start? Yeah.
Well, it's starting any time now. If it hasn't already, I haven't heard that one from Dale, so I won't confirm that it has officially started. But he was talking to the Met lab and that did the initial bottle roll test, and it'll be, you know, we're very happy with the start on what the bottle roll showed. The rock leaches at, you know, exactly what you would expect, and even higher on the silver side sometimes than you see. What we want to see is, though, we have that main Ruby structure and what you see in this area that has that high grade gold and silver component, and that's not necessarily something you'd want to throw on a leach pad. So there may be some various different routes that we look at, and ultimately when it becomes a mine would be a secondary circuit to a mine to process that high grade structure, and we would go through a different component or a different, you know, avenue versus being thrown out onto the leach pads. That Dale's getting that vectored in and figuring out exactly which different tests and methods they may want to look at that. But we would like to see, and we would expect to see, that the high grade silver come back at least in the 80s, if not up into the 90s, on some of those different optimization techniques.
Sure. And just want to follow up on that, like, how pervasive is that structure in your mine plan or your eventual mine plan, or your resource rather, you know?
That's the main Ruby structure. I don't know, I haven't seen what the ounces in that main structure versus the broad low grade would look like, but there'll be quite a few ounces in that high grade main Ruby structure for sure. And then you throw in some of the high grade stringers as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Stu?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Steve. So with the acceleration of the warrants, how much cash did you guys end up receiving, or how many of the warrants were exercised?
All of the warrants all 8 million of the warrants were exercised, and that's been reflected in the share structure now. That brought in 2.8 million cash. Those warrants were at 35-cent exercise price.
Yeah. Great. And then internally, have you kind of figured out the use of proceeds for that extra funding?
Drilling.
Yeah.
Ongoing drilling, and it's just drilling.
Yeah, but adding another drill rig to the current.
I mean, because we didn't have, like you said, our initial plan for phase 2 was just conservatively saying we're doing a 5,000 meter program. That we're by the end of the year we'll probably have done 20,000 meters in phase 2. So it's just been an ongoing drill program. At some point in the middle of that, we added that second rig to start testing the anomalies while we were, you know, because we had so much success at Ruby. So that's, use of proceeds is drilling. It's just keep and it'll carry us into phase 3 before we do that financing whenever we decide to do that.
Yeah. And so phase 3 would be in, you know, Q1 next year.
Yeah. We'll get caught up on assays hopefully over that kind of month break. Dale and team will, you know, with this oriented core has changed how they're looking at some of these other structures in that El Ruby area. And so they'll work out a plan, you know, for at least El Ruby and then whatever additional anomalies they want to test with the second rig. But I know they'll be starting on that one that we talked about already. Yeah.
And was it easy to get the second rig?
We've got a very, it was easy. I don't want to say this polite. It was very easy for us. We've had a fantastic relationship with Globe Explorer. They went and got a new rig, bought a new rig for us to do that. And I don't think they would have necessarily, with us only promising 3,000 meters of drilling with that rig when we added the second rig. So I don't think they would do that with most companies, but we've got a very good relationship with them. And so, no, it wasn't hard for us to get the second rig from them.
Yeah, fair enough. And because I know in the past you guys have made them more, you know, demountable and quicker to move, which has helped with your permitting. So this was a similar style of rig, and
all mountable rigs.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that, Artie.
You mentioned some high grade zones and some lower grade zones that surrounding these high grades. I'm wondering if the rock types are same.
If the rock type's the same, sorry, was
Yeah,
that?
post
Yeah,
structure.
rock. There was a slide, and I didn't go into it, but that there was that cartoon interpretation of the section there, and what we tend to see is while we have mineralization into the rhyolites, it's that particular andesite tends to be where we get those wider widths and better grades. It's just the rock, I guess, is a little more brittle and allowed for the fluids when it was coming in and the various events to spread out a bit more. So while you get a flexure in the zone, and then in that favorable rock type tends to be where we see those best grades and widths in those holes. But yeah, it tends to be that andesite that, you know, the andesite certainly holds both the low grade and the high grade.
What is the best intercept at El Rubi so far, and what is it telling to you?
The best high grade was I referenced on there, I think it was hole 218, where we had that over 20 grams gold and 1400 silver over 8 meters. That had that low grade halo around it as well, that I think was, if I'm trying to remember, I think the low grade halo in that particular area was 60 to 80 meters wide, around that. And those holes, again, you don't see it just, if you go back to the press releases, you'll see it a bit more, but oftentimes some of those holes in that main El Rubi structure will go through the main El Rubi, but they'll go through 4, 5, 6 different zones, some of them low grade, 15, 20 meters of economic low grade, or those narrow high grade stringers that we see down deeper that are that half meter, 2 meters wide, high grade kilogram plus silver. So that, yes, we have that main structure, but we also have these other structures. And again, it's kind of new and we haven't seen exactly how it's going to hold together, but that oriented core is showing us some of those high grade stringers where we've kind of always treated them more as being vertical in nature. They could be that the oriented core is saying that they're probably more horizontal. And we may be able to, Dale and team are working on how best to pick up more of those and how that's going to change the interpretation of those high grade stringers moving forward.
Thank you. And before identifying these targets, how much did you spend, like ballpark, for the Renaissance exploration in the beginning?
Our phase 1 program was just under 5,000 meters. The bulk of that was actually in the historic area. So we only put 5 holes into El Rubi in phase 1. They averaged about 200 meters or so depth, probably, in those 5 reconnaissance holes. So if that was 1,000 meters, not very much. It wasn't too much. And El Rubi was our #1 exploration target when we, look at it. You can see this large silicified dike right at the start of that plateau. Dale, again, we were the first ones to even go in and sample it, but that's, very minimal cost to go in and hike into something and sample it and send it off to the lab. So it was very, very low cost to come in and make that discovery at El Rubi, and that's how we've been treating our other anomalies. We've gone out and done the sampling and mapping work, and then now we're testing them with a similar kind of 5 to 10 reconnaissance holes in each one, and then wait for those assays to come back.
Thank you so much. Campbell?
Sure. Steve, if you want to put your slide back up, maybe one showing your concession and the other concessions. Always the Yajito question. Are you on Yajito land or private land, and are Yajitos in any of the adjacent mining concessions? And actually, if you can just take us through who your neighbors are.
So here there is an Yajito just off of our claims in this area. If you can see where the mouse is, just off of the El Macho claim. But where none of the work that we've been doing, and we actually have some of those Yajito working for us. We have a very good relationship with that Yajito group, but we're not drilling on their ground. All of this ground has been is private ranches, and so we have land access agreements with all of those ranches. One of the things that happened under Minefinders era is they had handed out very rich land access agreements, and so again, that's why they didn't really go out and bother exploring on a lot of the rest of the project. And at the time, this northern half of the project was, again, multiple ranches. Now it's all been consolidated by one rancher that controls all of this area. And he's been very favorable and very helpful with us. And so we've got very low land, in line with what you expect in Mexico, but land access agreements and rights to drill on all of this ground. We haven't had any problems. We've got a very good relationship with that local, both the town of Mesa Tres Rios and the town of Nacorichico. Most of our workforce comes from those towns. So you can say here, it's just land access agreements with the various ranches. Most of these ranches are abandoned in themselves, they're not active. We get some cattle roaming around the project, but they're not ranches like you would expect, you know, in the US or in Canada with full, you know, fully active. They're the El Rubi itself is an old ranch. It was, you can see some old bean fields and that in it, but there's not even there's no houses or there's no one living there on that ranch anymore. There's not even road access to that ranch. So very simple, very low costs, and we've had lots of support from our community partners.
Okay. Anything besides silver, gold, or PLGs?
One of the things that we didn't talk about, as you move another 3 or 4 Ks north of El Rubi, you get to a target area and the same regional structure that runs north-south. See it a bit on here, it doesn't say the name on here, but where we're at, our El Rubi is here, and on here it actually says El Rubi. That's not El Rubi. This was a map done by the Mexican government. This is La Gloria, again, that same major structure, but it's a large 3K by 3K zone of alteration. We put a couple shallow holes into it in phase 1 and saw that this was a different beast. This is a porphyry target. We saw that we were very high in the porphyry system there and the pyrite halo of a porphyry, but we did see a lot of the signature elements of moly, copper, and other things that you would expect with a porphyry. It's not our focus, but it's definitely something that's very real and exists on the project, and who knows, we may decide at some point to do a separate deal to do exploration on that. We don't want to be paying for 1,000-meter long blind holes into that thing, but it is something very interesting, and there are companies right now that are 1 or 2 that are under CA that are looking for porphyries in Mexico, so maybe that we do something separate on that to start getting some exploration work done up in that area as well. So there is some different stuff up in there base metal wise.
Okay, thank you. Gabe?
Yeah, I just have just one more question around sort of the elevation, topography, and the distances between Macho and those 3 anomalies, including the new one and El Rubi.
Yeah. Let's go to this slide. So Macho is a little bit higher, but I think what you've had there is I mean, it's not, visually it's not higher. It's maybe slightly higher to El Rubi where we sit at Macho. But I think what you've seen is the block, you've had a kind of a thrust up in the block there. So where we are in the zone tends to be much higher. You get a bit of gold component, very little silver in those assays, and no base metal. So again, indicative that you're high up in the traditional system of where you would expect to see things. That is about 2 kilometers south of our discovery here at El Rubi. And then has about 2 kilometers of strike length potential if you follow that on surface there. The northern anomaly is at least 2 kilometers north of, sorry, this is about a kilometer between Macho and El Rubi, but the bulk, like the heart of Macho Libre is 2K. Northern anomaly here is 2 kilometers to the north of El Rubi, and that's kind of the end of that 2 kilometer flat plateau right in here. This is off of the plateau, and you can see that we pick up that main trend again in the sampling there. I referenced the bean fields, and so there's been a lot of soil being disturbed in here, so that's a lot of why we don't see that anomaly continuing. We think it is dipping and going deeper and underneath, and it's just the soil's been contaminated from that historic farming that was done in these fields. But this is, this whole area here is that 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer plateau. Gets hilly up in here, and this is high elevation wise, is certainly higher up than El Rubi when you're up in this northeast area as well. Through here between Macho and El Rubi is the creek, and that's the creek that we pull all of our drilling water from. It flows year round, and you follow that creek all the way up, and that's what takes us to where this eastern anomaly was further up following that kind of arroyo. Then you get very steep cliff up in here, and as you move up in here, you're in more of a hilly environment along this eastern mineralized trend.
Oh, and was there one further south as well that you think?
That zone goes back towards, actually I'll show a slide to a different slide to show you where that is exactly. That zone, so again, you can see El Rubi here, Macho sits in between, and this new zone is sitting up in this area here.
Got it.
Yeah, and then again, you can see, and we have a road that goes all the way along Again, they drilled these because the road was there and it was easy to access with the track mounted rig. And again, we've always said that that was more an opportunity, and these are stringer zones off of the main structure. The main structure we think kind of comes ripping through this area with our interpretation. But yeah, that new zone is up in this area. Well, we may call it a Southern Macho or Macho Sewer. Dale really likes that name, so it may be that that's, if we hit something there, that's what that zone ends up being called. It's kind of at the end of that 2-kilometer extent of what Macho Libre is.
Got it. Yeah. Okay.
And now I'll have that on some new slides moving forward when Dale gets back and gets all this stuff updated.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. That's great. And just gonna ask about, so that bean farm you said it was, or where the soils you think had been disturbed, so you couldn't get readings there. I mean, are you doing any reconnaissance drilling to see if it hits sort of the
following El Ruby for sure up into that area? And we've done some, and we've seen some of our reconnaissance drilling is showing us that there's a zone there and it's narrow, but we've also there's been a reinterpretation. We just hired a new geologist that started working recently that Dale's been very impressed with, and he's starting to interpret things as going a different direction as well up in that area. So there'll be some additional testing to test the new theory that things are dipping back opposite of what we would have, the way it was tested and drilled. There's been signs of both on the project, depending where you are, of what the orientation is of the main kind of faults in the area. But he kind of came in and looked at some stuff that he saw in portions of that area between El Ruby and the northern anomaly, and thinks that there's a good chance that it's sloping in a direction that if we continue to drill at that same orientation, we would be very likely to miss the main structure. So there's going to be a couple of testing of that theory moving forward as well.
Yeah. What do they say? The old adage, like no two geologists have the same opinion?
This is very true. It can certainly change, and it's tough there because there's not a lot of outcrop, but he stumbled onto some stuff that he found that he's interpreting to go the other way. And so Dale, I think, is inclined to believe him and give it a crack, and likes that, we have a geologist that was free thinking and identified that stuff. It's always, you don't often get that with junior geologists being confident enough to reinterpret something and look at that. So we're very impressed with that interpretation. And it's something that Dale, because of COVID, hasn't been on site. So he hasn't been able to monitor and see in person a lot of that drilling, and finally just said, I'm going down, spending a month and a half on site. And so he's been quite happy to be back on site and see a lot of this stuff in person, and certainly concurs with that hypothesis.
Exciting. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Steve.
And just back on the drilling, so if you could just remind us of how many holes are left in like the phase 2 program, and then to drill, and then how many are awaiting assays, if you include those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've probably got 30 plus holes outstanding right now. Waiting, the assay lab has been very slow the last couple months as COVID kind of took over and people got back to work and drilling. It's certainly overloaded the labs, and we've seen that with a lot of our peers, and you're getting sporadic news releases every at least over a month, but sometimes for over 2 months. Our lab that we deal with, they do all the prep assays for the gold and preparing everything in Hermosillo, but then it gets shipped up to North Vancouver to run the multi-element with the silver numbers and everything else. So that lab has certainly been overworked. You get the golden triangle stuff that certainly bogs down that lab in North Vancouver. And so it's definitely been slow, frustrating for us and our shareholders, I'm sure. But we expect to have a release out very soon, and that'll incorporate that metallurgy officially in a release, as well as a bunch of the different exploration results that we hopefully will be getting here anytime. And then I don't know if it'll be in the next one or not, but we finally getting that rig back to that western zone and to start getting some numbers on the step outs there as we start stepping out 50 meters at a time to the north and the south from that discovery hit. I think we'll be hopefully it's on the next release, but with how slow the lab has been, I don't know if it will be.
Yeah. And then what are the rigs? Have they finished drilling the program, or?
No, they're going to go, they're going to go till the middle of December. I don't know how many additional holes. Again, Dale's just kind of they're going along and continuing to drill Ruby and stepping out. I don't know the exact number of holes that would be left. It'll be kind of just what gets done by middle of December.
Yeah, gotcha. And yeah, I think the last update was it Dale that was waiting to go to site, or he was coming back from site
He was
and in
waiting.
quarantine.
Yeah, he hadn't been yet, and I think he may have even been going right as we were doing that update.
Yeah, I think so.
Because he's got about a week left on site now before he comes home and does his quarantine back here for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But yes, I think he was just heading down when we did the last one. And then the independent was there last week that's doing the resource, and now should be back at home and working on the report.
Right.
We haven't cut off the data officially yet, so Velia hasn't updated the wireframes, our in-house database manager, but that'll be cut off here in the next week or 2 weeks. Have her get all the wireframes done on our Ruby. She's obviously done the historic stuff because we haven't updated anything there, but she's got to update those wireframes for the resource calc, and Dale will be working back and forth once he's back, putting the pressure as much as we can to make sure that we're getting the most out of that resource as possible with the independent.
Yeah, well, it's good that everything's still happening and the people are back from site. Thanks for that, Campbell.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it's great to sort of have a monthly show and interact with Silver Viper, get the update and confidence building exercise. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll be queuing you for feedback, really important for us, as I said. And you can follow Silver Viper on LinkedIn and Twitter, I believe. And you'll get, what's that?
And Facebook, we got all three.
And Facebook, lots of interesting thoughts and tidbits and articles and things. And you can also follow Amvest Capital and our upcoming events, and don't have to wait for the email. So with that, closing remark for November, Steve.
Yeah, again, thanks everyone for taking time out of their day to listen to the Silver Viper story, and stay tuned. We're going to have, I think, some good results coming up, hopefully, and certainly some follow-ups on that western hole. I know visually we're very excited that it looks like it's continuing on, so it doesn't think it's going to be a one-hit wonder on that western zone. So and obviously the big catalyst coming up in the next quarter will be that maiden resource, which we're all very, very excited about to get a number on the board, and I think that opens us up to some other funds that like to see a resource before they invest. So exciting times moving forward, and I think you're going to see some exciting times with gold and silver as we get through these, the coronavirus lockdown and the U.S. election sorts itself out finally, and you get a big stimulus bill in the U.S. that devalues the dollar a bit more and gets gold and silver running. So very exciting, and I think it's a good time. No
idea what's going on down here, but we'll see. We'll have the best guess. All right, thanks everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.